So I talked to Ken Stern, who is the author of Republican Like Me, How I Left the Liberal Bubble and Learned to Love the Right. Turns out, may I say, and I really admire him. He's an extraordinary man and a great sense of humor. We had a wonderful talk. You'll hear the humor that he is capable of, including being teasable, which I think is a sign of true confidence and enlightenment. The title's a little misleading because he didn't really become a right-wing Republican, but what he did was go enter the rituals, the ceremonies, the habits, the traditions of right-wing life in America. He shot a pig or shot at a pig in a Texas hunt. He went to NASCAR, went to evangelical churches. He hung out a little bit with Steve Bannon and so on. And so he didn't become a MAGA American or even a conservative Republican, but what he did was write a title that really got everyone's attention. But he also said, if we stay in our bubble, if you stay in your bubble, if you're a liberal or a conservative, no good can come of that. They truly are echo chambers. We truly do lock ourselves into a confirmation system, which only increases our sense of isolation, and that the other side is peopled with people who are not really good Americans. And so that sense that the other, capital O, whether it's the squad on the left or the Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, Matt Gaetz world on the right, is alien and un-American, we have reason to doubt the authenticity and the validity of some of these people on the left and particularly on the right, but we can't get stuck there. And when I think of the election that's coming, I'm trying to, and I urge you to think about this and see if you agree, I'm trying to wean myself of personality and really just think about policy. So I love the public lands. We should move beyond that and try to look at what's the America I want to live in. And if I had to choose between Party A and Party B to pursue the America I want to live in, which one do I choose and why? What are the policy solutions to the problems that we have that I think are more likely under one party's victory than the other? And I'm not saying that makes everybody a Democrat, not at all. But I'm saying that policy is more important than personality, and we've really gotten stuck on the cult of personality. And of course, that comes from media, that comes from the imperial presidency, that comes from the breakdown of the legislative process, which forces our presidents to be more active than they otherwise might be. And so I've loved these conversations. Ken Stern the first thing he said was, I wrote that book a long time ago, and he made it clear that he probably wouldn't title the book the same way today and probably wouldn't write the same book today, because between 2018, when he published Republican Like Me, and today, the Republican Party has moved hard right, hard Trump, and he finds much of that to be fundamentally objectionable to the idea of a democratic society. So I'm going to keep at this. I'm going to find as many people who are thinking about America at 250 as I possibly can. I'm going to interview them, and I'm going to let them talk. But I want to hear what people are thinking, and I think that he was absolutely right to climb out of the bubble and go see what the other side does, how it thinks, how it feels, how it sees the world. And what he discovered was that, if your view is that everyone who goes to NASCAR is a rube or a redneck or a bigot, then you're just not really doing the work of discernment that's required if we're going to have a thoughtful American politics. So I hope you're enjoying all of this. I certainly am. Let me know what you think. Suggest people I should interview. If you can help us, we really need the help because this is expensive. And as I've said 1,000 times, I don't take any money for any of this. I want this program to have a bigger megaphone, and I want to interview all the most interesting people of all persuasions to truly try to listen to America as we approach a quarter of a millennium of our national experiment. So let's go to the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special edition of Listening to America. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to interview Ken Stern. What a pedigree. Haverford College, Phi Beta Kappa, JD from Yale Law School. I had a chance to grow up in Germany and Korea. But perhaps most pertinent is that you were the CEO of National Public Radio from 1999 to 2007. So that spells liberal to me. That spells American establishment, liberal, the NPR world. But you wrote a book in 2018 called Republican Like Me, How I Left the Liberal Bubble and Learned to Love the Right. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So That was 2018. If you were writing the book today, what might be different?
Well, so the book is really about the polarization of America and why it's happened and the risks and challenges of it. I think I would, if I wrote it today, I would say everything I wrote 6 years ago, plus on steroids. So everything that I think I saw and worried about has gotten, I think, exponentially worse over the last 6 years.
So polarization, unquestionable. I mean, looking at it from the outside, Congress appears to be paralyzed. And even when there's a consensus, bill burbles up, things can go wrong at the last minute. Outside forces get involved and not just lobbyists and so on. So I think every American gets it that we have a border crisis. Nothing seems to get done. We need energy policy. We don't get it. We don't even produce budgets. And so, of course, a lot of this has been around for a long time, but it does seem to me that in the last couple of decades, we have truly weaponized our politics in a way that is unusual in American life. And now, from my opinion, Ken, we're lost. I mean, a very great nation, maybe the world's principally important nation, is essentially paralyzed. And that's what led you to start this project, right?
Yeah. So I'll tell you sort of the creation story of it in a moment, but I think what we see in Congress is a symptom of a larger ill, which is we don't know each other. We have become increasingly tribal about our politics. We demonize the other side, and there are enormous costs and consequences to it. And you saying we're lost, I think, is a perfectly apt description of a country that is increasingly taking sides mostly over tribal politics, which is we hate the other side because they're the other side. And I think that's not that there aren't real issues at stake, but there always have been real issues at stake. And what has changed is how little we share facts and how little we share a common understanding of what we're trying to accomplish. So the story that got me into this book is actually one I love to tell. It actually started with, as you say, my pedigree reads liberal, and it's actually right. I lived in Washington, D.C., a 93% Democratic city. I live on a block that in a ward that's actually 97% Democratic. I live in a house that's 100% Democratic. It's who I know and what I've grown up with. But I actually started thinking about it when I live on this very nice street called Hobart Street in Washington, D.C. And every year we have a block party called Porch Fest. It was actually just last weekend. And they close the street and people put out food. My wife makes D.C. cookies, hundreds of them. It's quite a nice event. And every year we start with the Hobart Street Pledge. And I guess it was about 8 years ago, they started off everyone's and it goes some everyone's welcome on Hobart Street, white or black, man or woman, gay or straight. And this particular year they put a twist on it. They said everyone but Republicans at the end. And it was a joke, but it wasn't a joke because it's essentially a 95% Democratic bloc. And it suggested how could that be? How could we actually even got to a place where we feel free to joke about that and think it's funny? And that's actually what started me on the notion wait a minute, I'm only associated with Democrats. Why don't I talk to the other side?
So are you still invited?
Well, it did cause a little bit. So I actually wrote about it in The Atlantic, and not favorably, as you might imagine. That caused some hard feelings on Hobart Street. And every year I go to the block party. You can't live on the block. You can't uninvite me. Every year they do the Hobart Street Pledge, and I sort of hope and pray that they don't actually add that, and they never have. So we made it through another year without that uninviting of Republicans.
Not to get lost here, but what is a Washington cookie?
Oh, so very important. My wife has a couple different cookie cutters. They're shaped in the District of Columbia, and then she decorates them. So sometimes in this shape, sometimes as the DC flag, sometimes as the map of DC. It's a big production.
I can imagine, but so these are shaped. These are shaped like DC. There's not a special DC recipe for the cookie.
That's right. No, they're just regular sugar cookies. And the most popular part about it is that sometimes she decorates them, and some she leaves out for the kids to put on their own icing and stuff, and the kids love that. If we had to if there was something to bring us together in this country, it's probably sugar cookies.
So what's the shape of profound dysfunction?
I think it's an amorphous blob, I'm afraid.
So this is very interesting. So you felt that you were caught in a liberal bubble and that this can't be good because it's a sign of the tribalism and so on that's going on. So you decided to jump over the wall and go find out what the right does and how it thinks and how it sees the world and whether it's as much of a threat as you once thought it was.
That's right. That's exactly what I did. And I traveled the country. I went pig hunting in Texas. I went to a lot of churches. NASCAR. I did all the things.
Tea Party meetings.
And some of them were, the Tea Party meetings were a little off-putting, but I had great experiences and met great people. I spent, and people might be horrified, it was actually Tucker Carlson who sent me to, before he was the evil Tucker Carlson of modern day, sent me pig hunting. And I spent time with Steve Bannon, who was a not well-known guy at the point. I met a lot of interesting people along the way.
So I want to hear some of these stories because they sound absolutely extraordinary. But let me get this question on and off the table. Did you have a conversion experience? In other words, one answer to the paralysis and the confusion is to say a pox on both your houses, enough. But you, if your title is an accurate one, found much to admire in the right.
So I found, so I actually went through I actually changed my party registration. I did the bit. And I think the thing, so I would say a couple things, observationally, one of which is I met a lot of people I admire, people I would never meet along the way, people who are doing, people now, if you read like the diction in social media, are awful, sort of from the left, are awful people and racist and stuff. But I found lots to admire in some of the just ordinary people I met along the way. Wonderfully civic-minded, deeply concerned about their families or communities. Might not agree on everything, certainly didn't agree on everything, but knowing them made me understand them better. It also gave me a view into their perceptions of the left or even the center. And I think it made me understand my world a little bit better than I would have otherwise, or at least their perception of my world. It didn't, and I think, in a bygone era, I might have actually stuck because I actually found things to agree with on things like immigration or religious freedom. But I was doing this at the very end, the very beginning of the Trump era. So going to a Trump rally and hanging out with Steve Bannon, was an interesting guy, but not a guy who I was going to agree with. And the world they were creating then, I mean, they really were inventing a new world that turned me off. And I think one of the sort of the final takeaways of the book was I found a lot I learned. I found a lot of people I could agree with, but where the Republican Party was clearly going, it wasn't at the beginning of the book, but had by the end of the book, was a journey I didn't want to take with them.
And now, of course, it's gone much farther. There's a sense in which the Republican right is in a moment of enormous confidence and has become, I think, an exaggeration of what it was in 2018. Is that fair?
Oh, without a doubt, right? So, I wouldn't have imagined it playing out the way it did. I could see in retrospect some of the seeds of it, but yes, it's become, I think to a certain extent on both sides, but certainly on the right, has become a place of anger and hatred and a cause, and trying to take us into a very dark place in American history.
So I take it that your view is more, we must get out of our bubbles and try to find agency and respect for other points of view, but that doesn't necessarily mean we flip.
Yeah, no, I think that's entirely right. Part of what I saw even then, and certainly true now, is sort of political tribalism, and this is actually the beginning of the book more than this. Political tribalism has replaced all the other tribalisms in our life. It used to be that you didn't want to bring the Jew or the Catholic home to dinner. Now you don't want to bring the Republican home to dinner. And much of that has little to do with the underlying facts, but it mostly has to do with the fact that we've sorted ourselves out in a way that we don't know each other. We fear the other. We're willing to attribute the worst motives and the worst qualities to the others. That to me is the underlying root of the problem. And if we knew each other better, if we were willing to give the assumption of good faith to the other side, would not be land in which people like Trump and them could find purchase in.
So tell me if you think this is right or wrong. If we had listened more carefully to the angst, anxiety, frustration of the right, Trump would not have become the president of the United States. That Donald Trump becomes the president because the grievance and the rage had built up to such a point that Steve Bannon could just say, tear it all down. Let's just explode it. It's got to stop. that Donald Trump is not the cause of this. He's a symptom, although an extraordinarily important one, but that the establishment's, let's say NPR, incapacity to hear honest concerns about where the country was headed is what led to this level of reaction.
Well, yeah, I think it's for sure. Yes. You could call it the sort of the deplorables moment, where people in authority paint with enormous brush about what the other side was about and who the quality of who they are. And it goes both ways, right? This is not just about the left, the Democrats not listening to the Republicans. Goes both ways. The Republican establishment being willing to characterize people of good faith on the other side in the worst possible way. So, yeah, I think this is a moment that created the opportunity for people like Trump, adventurers like Trump, to take advantage of the weakness in the system.
We need to take a short break. I'm talking with Ken Stern, formerly the CEO of NPR, the author in 2018 of Republican Like Me, How I Left the Liberal Bubble and Learned to Love the Right. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to this special edition of Listening to America. I'm Clay Jenkinson, and I'm talking with Ken Stern, the author of Republican Like Me. So I want to hear some of these stories, but before that, I just wanted to sort of get a sense of this. So the usual narrative, as you know, Ken, is that senators and representatives used to stay in Washington longer. They went to dinner. They fought by day, but at night they could have a beer. They understood that the compromise is the nature of the thing, and it's not that they didn't have strong political opinions and even ideologies, but in the end they understood how a democracy works, and that now they're so busy going home to raise money and so on that they no longer have a real presence in D.C., and because of that, it's allowed people to demonize the other in unprecedented ways. I'm sure there's truth to that, but that's not the whole story, is it?
I think, especially in the Senate, they all know each other pretty darn well, and they may even like each other pretty darn well, but they're downstream of the rest of politics. They are recipients of it. They're reflections of it. They probably know they could get along perfectly well, and it's not because they're not having dinner with each other. It's because the politics back home of what's going on. They're a reflection of it, not the cause of it. So I'm not worried that they're not having dinner at the Willard Hotel. I'm worried about what's happening on social media and at Trump rallies and at progressive rallies in Portland, Oregon. Those are the things that are causing it, not the other way around.
So how did this happen?
So I think there are a number of interlocking megatrends that actually help create this. One is what we call the big sort, which I'm sure you know well, where we began to divide ourselves along political lines, Democrats living with Democrats, Republicans living with Republicans.
And now, they're moving to zip codes to be with each other in a way that is exaggerated over anything previous in American history.
Right. Democrat might move to Austin, but they ain't moving to the rest of Texas. And they talk about that openly as that's the way it should be. And I think that's actually a reflection of a larger trend. Bob Putnam has written about the death of social capital, which means the death of churches and unions and sewing clubs and PTAs and all the other things that created social capital among us. Those are gone. And sort of politics and identity has kind of taken its place. And I don't think we can underestimate the impact of media and the balkanization of media and social media, which has also created this echo chamber for people and magnified all the hate. I think all of those things added together create the texture that we have now.
My sense is that millions and millions of Americans are uncomfortable with the pace of change. They are uncomfortable with emerging technologies, that they are centrists largely, and they sort of belong to the Bill Clinton brand of Democrats and you might even say the Ronald Reagan brand of Republicans, that the broad center of the country is about 65 or 70% of the spectrum, but that the two edges have become very loud and extremely effective and have in some ways hijacked the debate.
I think that's certainly right. And there's a cycle to it, which is they occupy the space. They're the one, then they get reported on. It just keeps going round and round. So if you go, even if you go onto the commentary boards on the Washington Post or Breitbart or whatever, it's owned by the angriest people. And if you just saw the world, if that's all you could see, you would just understand that we were just one angry country. But I do know that there are lots of people out there who aren't part of that, but they're dominated by that. And the political conversation is dominated by those edges.
So let's just take an example of this. I want to hear about your hog party in Texas, offered to you by Tucker Carlson. First question, when you go there, do you say, I'm a liberal and I'm just here to see? Or do they think you're a spy? Do they think that you're an infiltrator?
I was always very clear about what I was doing. I was writing a book and who I am. And in that particular case, I had never hunted before, that was what really disgusted people, was that it was not that I was from Washington, D.C., but I had never hunted before and really didn't know how to shoot a gun. But I actually found, once you got past that, I had a great time pig hunting. So we went out in the morning. I got adopted. The guy who ran the place thought I was going to shoot myself. So he basically he took me out to this particular place and said, "Don't move, and the pigs will run by and take a shot at it." Well, that doesn't not very good for book writing purposes. So I wandered off and I joined up with this 3-generation family from Georgia who had traveled all day to Texas to go for a pig hunt. And I spent the morning hunting with them. They had a son who was my son's age at the time, which was probably around 10. And he became my sort of mentor for the morning. I walked along and I would turn to him with a question. My gun would sort of swing in the wrong direction. He was like, "Now, Ken, pointed elsewhere." And they were wonderfully patient with me. And then in the afternoon, ended up with a group of uniform salesmen. And it was like a little United Nation. There was one guy from Eastern Europe, and there was one guy, a black guy from the Army, and there was someone who had immigrated from Central America. And I think they were all conservative. They're from Texas, and they were my shooting companions. And they helped me finally, I think, I'm never quite sure whether I actually killed a pig or not, but they claimed I did. And
you fired a shot and a pig died.
So actually what happened is we'd gone all afternoon, and every time a pig had come by, they had managed to shoulder their weapons and shoot them dead before I even could tell what was going on. And finally they were like, "Okay, Ken, this is yours. And there was a pig right in front of me, and I fired him. He squealed and ran off. And we all gave chase, and there was one guy ahead of me, and I caught up, and the pig was dead. I think he may have gave the coup de grace and then said it was my kill, but I'll never really know.
Well, it sounds like Theodore Roosevelt in Mississippi in 1902 when he went bear hunting, and he couldn't find a bear, so finally they clubbed a she-bear, tied it to a tree, and said, "Mr. President, you may now shoot your bear." And he said, "That's not sport. I refuse," and led to a famous cartoon by Clifford Berryman. So you're in on the kill. Who knows if you're the kill shot, but you've now killed. What happens then? You come up and you look at this dead creature.
Well, then it's food, which I had no use for because I was leaving town. So I then paid extra for the opportunity for them to skin it, for the people around to skin it, and then I gave the food to my compatriots who lived nearby or lived in Houston, which is about an hour away.
All right, so you've done this. And they turn out to be good and decent people, of course, and they're generous to you, and it's fun in some sense of the term.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, I think the other thing to take away was that they didn't care. You asked me whether, they cared whether I was a liberal from Washington, D.C., and they sure didn't care, right? It's just not where they live. A lot of people that I met along the way weren't that interested in politics. They were interested in their family, their community. If they knew they'd been labeled deplorables, they weren't really sure why. They were people who, I think, on the edges of politics, we overestimate the importance of politics to people's lives. I think that's one of the things that goes on in the world of independence, which is they're low information voters. It's just not the sort of core concerns. And that's a lot of the people I met. And we underestimate, a lot of people who will vote for Trump who will be labeled by racists as racists just because of that. Our people just don't live for politics in the same way that a lot of us do.
And of course, Washington, D.C. is the bubble of bubbles. But these people that you're with, some of them are going to be rabid Second Amendment people who believe that the Second Amendment is the most important amendment and take my gun out of my cold, dead hands. There's that side of some of this too, right?
Sure, of course. I think for the people I was with there, that's a given. because that's part of their lives. I mean, they grew up with guns, that they own guns. A lot of them were former soldiers, part of the world they live in. So for them, the idea that we would want to take away their guns because of what's happening in these other cities that they don't live anywhere near has nothing to do with them seems almost inconceivable and just doesn't make any sense to them.
You know what John Kennedy said? So Bobby Kennedy went down to Texas in the late 1950s to meet with Lyndon Johnson, and Johnson made him hunt. And he went out and Bobby Kennedy had to shoot at a deer at least. And he came back and told his brother what had happened. And Jack Kennedy said, it's not sport unless the deer has a rifle too.
Right.
So what did you learn? You came away, you had fun. They were nice people. You weren't morally damaged by being part of this hunt. What did you learn that day?
So I think it's in addition to learning, which I had already suspected that I'm a terrible shot and shouldn't be taken on anyone's hunt. I think it's part of a larger story of getting to, did I have any searing insights to the life of other people? Probably not, but it was part of a getting to know a world and people and a culture that just I wouldn't be exposed to otherwise. And understanding them, I probably would have not described, had this conversation about the Second Amendment and people's perspective on it without having that experience. And I had the same thing in churches, which is, places I've never gone to before and probably haven't been since, allowing me to understand them and think of them not as the other, but as people with sort of common concerns about, their lives and how they want to live their lives that aren't all that different from mine.
So will you hunt another pig?
I would if I had that cause, but I haven't had that cause since. Yeah.
You don't have a stuffed pig head on your wall of your study.
I do not. That would be awfully fetching if I did. My wife is, just cultural. My wife's a vegetarian, so I think it would not be allowed then.
So like a double sin.
Yeah, it would not be allowed now. Yeah.
I'm trying to understand you here. I think you're saying it's not all the stuff that comes out of their mouths is crazy, that they have a point of view, that I should be more open-minded about this. I should widen my cultural intakes and not be stuck in the bubble. But did you ever come away thinking they have, and I ask this as a respectful question, did you ever come away thinking they have answers to some of our problems that we should listen to more?
Of course they do. That's one of the things which is when you actually peel things back and look at what things that happened over the last 6 or 7 years, a lot of things that's actually almost core Democratic positions now are actually just reflections of, trade as being the biggest piece of it. Sort of the anti-China, right. Anti-trade, that killed my community. That's reflected in sort of core Democratic politics now. Immigration has quickly turned in that direction as well. So there's just lots of things in which not all Democrats, but sort of core Democrats politics now reflects, what they were talking about then. And if you can't even acknowledge that they had some core of truth, some insights, which I don't think people really are willing to do, then you're missing part of the story, which is a lot of these people have legitimate grievances against the system, locked out, and their concerns left behind. And, to a certain extent, Washington's now reflecting about it without acknowledging that those were sort of core Republican ideas at that point, or right-wing movement ideas.
Yeah, take immigration, for example. My head almost pops off when I hear Democrats saying, well, we're going to probably need the wall now, and we're going to need to do this. So that things that the Democrats went to the wall over in the Trump administration, it's a terrible idea. Suddenly now, right, and now it's like, well, maybe not the entire wall, but yeah, we need some of that. And so there's the problem of hypocrisy, of course, which is endemic to our politics. But I do think that the right has raised certain questions that really resonate with the American people. And if Trump is reelected in 2024, which I reckon he might well be, the border will be one of the 2 or 3 most important issues. And that I feel that the Democrats made colossal mistakes in not taking America's concern about this seriously and forcing a real debate about what to do about this. But the right owns that narrative, don't they?
I think that's exactly right. So I think in the Democratic echo chamber, terrible, dumb, racist, label all you want. No one actually sort of judging about, well, does it make sense in certain circumstances to do that? Is that a real problem that people should be concerned about? And then, even now with Biden sort of making changes, rapid changes, he'll never convince the American public that he's the leader on it, right? Because they're desperately trying to catch up with where the Republicans have been for a decade or more. And I think people actually have a lot of common sense about these things, and they're just not going to buy that.
People could say he's finally doing some of the right thing for the wrong political reasons, but at least he's finally doing some of the right thing too little too late. But no one's going to say, well, it's even now. They both are, no one owns the narrative on the border. That ship sailed, right?
Yeah. And no one will say they listen to us, right? I mean, a lot of politics, I think, should be about listening to people and trying to think about what their real concerns are and getting past a lot of the rhetoric. And it just doesn't happen. It doesn't happen here until I think very fine political calculations are forcing them to do it. And events on the ground that are just beyond what anyone can take.
So of the number of things that I might want to sit and watch, NASCAR is not one of them, mostly because it's so loud. Talk about your visit to NASCAR.
So I drove it. So it was actually part of a larger trip. So I was trying to do a couple of different things. I was trying to understand policies from their perspective. And I didn't have to leave Washington or my phone to do that, truthfully, but to really understand the cultural orientation of people. And this was an opportunity to find sort of the right in large numbers, 100,000. So I went down to Martinsville, Virginia, for the NASCAR races there. You're absolutely right. It's exceptionally loud and kind of unpleasant, hard to follow, right? I mean, just zooming around and around and around. And it did not make me a NASCAR fan either. So, I mean, it sounds like a failed experiment. I didn't become a hunter or I didn't become a NASCAR fan, but I did spend a lot of time just talking with folks, right? And often talking to them about not the finer points of policy, but sort of their lives. And that's really what I tried to do wherever I go, which was not to sort of debate the finer points of social policy, but try to understand their orientation and sort of their broader perspectives on life. And mostly, what you hear was anger and the feeling of being locked out and their concerns not being heard by the people they perceived who own the levers of power in this country.
Fair enough. That was back when having a Confederate icon or flag was still permitted at NASCAR. Do you think that the left's view of this, that anyone with a Confederate icon is therefore an unreconstructed Confederate racist, is that fair?
It's an interesting, if I was going to ding the left for anything, it's for the notion that the fail to put anything in perspective in the sense that rules now have always been there. You see that in lots of different things, and sort of like the sense of you don't agree with those rules that you've inherited yourself, that you grew up with, and you don't immediately reject them in their totalities. You're an awfully bad person. I actually went to a high school in McLean, Virginia, and was to a certain extent sort of bedroom community, mostly government people, now actually wealthier than it was. And I look back at my high school picture of our class of 250, and there were Confederate flags hanging. I didn't remember this. We're waving them around in our class picture. It's sort of unfathomable now. But that was sort of I don't think they meant it other than as an act of rebellion against sort of school authorities. And I think a lot of that is people don't spend a lot of time thinking about these symbols until they're sort of forced to give them up. And so, no, I don't agree. I don't agree with any sort of 100% conclusory things about people they don't know.
And this, too, was the era of the Dukes of Hazzard. And so some of this could be just kind of innocent fanboy kind of stuff. In other words, if you said to each one of them, what's your view of the Civil War? I doubt that they're going to make the case for the lost cause. This is, as you say, a rebellious act.
Yeah, it's like you say, I can't have a Confederate flag. Well, screw you. I'm going to fly a Confederate flag because that's my heritage and whatever, But I think it's mostly, even back then, was mostly about you don't get to tell me what to do.
Well, I mean, to take a much more obvious example, don't tell me what to do. Don't make me wear a mask during an international pandemic. I mean, the reaction was partly because some people had legitimate concerns about masks and social distancing and so on. But a lot of it was, I don't want anybody telling me how I spend my freedom, how I present myself in my community.
I think history will sort of play out and judge some of that. And it's not going to be 100% in one direction about who was right and who's wrong. It might be 90-10, take a big risk for yourself and others when you insist on your personal liberties. But, sort of some things around schools and others, I think will be judged and sort of the impact of social isolation, I think, will be judged against the governmental authorities of the time, or at least the central government authorities of the time.
You and I probably both believe that masks were an imperfect solution, but it was not the end of the world to wear a mask. And that's an acceptable sort of thing. It's probably good. But it's important, isn't it, that we have a group of people that regard themselves as sort of Jeffersonian, Patrick Henry patriots who are edgy about government regulation and want to challenge the establishment's insistence on certain things. Isn't that important in our culture?
I think the thing that worries me about that is the notion that we don't have a shared responsibility to make some decisions together, right? Because ultimately, if everyone's making their own decision about these things, then the whole thing falls apart. So in the end, I'm not terribly sympathetic to the sort of the mass not wearers because they're making decisions for everyone else effectively. And that's, I think, the notion that they get to make all the decisions and doesn't care about what sort of the collective does, I think can be a dangerous thing in a global pandemic.
Yes, indeed. Let's take a short break. I'm having a wonderful conversation with Ken Stern, formerly the CEO of NPR, the author of this fascinating book, Republican Like Me, How I Left the Liberal Bubble and Learned to Love the Right. Welcome back to this special edition of Listening to America. I'm talking with Ken Stern about his book, Republican Like Me. So you're I won't say infiltrating, but you're going to things that are associated with the right, kind of ceremonial and pageantry of the right, including evangelical churches, the great pig hunt in Texas, to NASCAR and so on. What did you learn about NPR from these people? Because I grew up in North Dakota, I'm still there for a long time, and I think you're kind of an important factor in all of this, but for a long time, as you know, NPR was regarded as Radio Free Nicaragua. And under your leadership, NPR really tried to stretch itself in some new dimensions. I'm sure that was controversial inside the building, but it seems to me that you can be regarded as someone who helped to save NPR.
That's a very charitable description of my time at NPR. I was there at a time of probably the last big growth of radio in this country. And it was sort of a great time to be at NPR, and it allowed us to do wonderful things. And it's a great organization. But I grew up on the Washington Post in sort of Watergate era and sort of the time when those Woodward and Bernstein were heroes. They're heroes in my family. Still today, I think that the best media in this country are the New York Times, the Washington Post, and NPR. Things like that. My experiences was to hear the perspective of others about them. And these are people, by the way, who didn't really consume them, sort of had the sense from others. In a lot of these conversations, I want to be clear, like I'm sort of criticizing the left for not listening to the right. Well, it's double that for the right not listening to the left. So let's be clear about that. But I think mostly they were saying is like, these people don't know me. They don't reflect me. And how could they? No one who knows me works there. Just another chapter in that controversy at NPR was recently when an editor named Uri Berliner said, hey, every single member of the NPR newsroom is a Democrat. I don't know how he knows that, but that's actually fairly consistent with surveys in the past, not of NPR, but of journalism, major journalism organizations more generally. You can be a great journalist and have every intention to offer deep insights from both sides, but you wouldn't cover race without having blacks and whites and Latinos involved. You wouldn't cover gender with only men. How can you cover politics with only Democrats, even with the best intentions and with the best skills? It's just not a credible thing to do. And I think that's what these major media organizations do. They're not of the country as a whole, and I think it's reflected in how they decide what's important to cover and the tone around those things.
So I agree with you. I think that NPR is one of the great class acts of American life. PBS also, that our public broadcasting has really been very important to this country, and I wish more people listened to it. And I wish that the people who early on decided that it was too far left for them would give it another chance, because I don't think that is really any longer the case, at least not in that measure. When I turn on my television in the evening, I'll watch a little MSNBC. So that's Lawrence O'Donnell and Rachel Maddow and so on. And then I'll turn over to Fox, and it was Tucker, but it's Sean Hannity and Laura Ingraham and so on. I think that this is very dangerous, that these aren't the only ones, but they kind of are easy to identify as the echo chamber of the left, the echo chamber of the right. It seems to me that's really, really dangerous in a free society, although, of course, we have to honor the First Amendment. And there is no fairness doctrine on cable, and no fairness doctrine on broadcast either anymore. But when for example, when Trump is in real trouble, which he almost always is, and I turn on MSNBC and I see kind of glee and cheerleading, and it rankles my spirit. Even though my politics are closer to theirs than to the other side, I resent, cheerleading for fundamental problems in our culture because it happens to suit their own political prejudice. And then I go over to the other side, and I just find that really bewildering, that just the kind of grievance day after day and night after night, it's just all grievance. And, during some of the most important events in the public sphere over the last couple of years, it's just Hunter Biden every day, all day. And so they both seem to me to be toxic. Is that your view?
Yeah, I think that's right. But I think there's another layer on top of it, which compounds it. Because, if you turn back the notion of nonpartisan journalism is actually a relatively new thing in American history. The newspapers originally creatures of political parties. So we managed to survive that for 150 years. So I don't think that by itself, as much as I sort of agree with you on sort of your take on MSNBC and Fox in particular, and Fox in double particular, I don't think that by itself would be what has put us into this particularly bad situation that we are now. I think it's that combined with the divisions, the sort of physical divisions we have among neighbors that says you not only disagree with each other, but you're a bad person if you disagree with me, and you're a racist, or you're un-American, or you're whatever the right says about Democrats. I think that's the absence of common space and public squares that we can actually get to know each other is the difference than before.
So what's the remedy? What's the solution? How do we heal? How do we move back towards something like a compromise paradigm where we disagree sometimes passionately, but we know that you got to get a jobs bill. We know you got to do an energy bill. We know you got to do a border bill. We decide to work things out in some sort of dynamic compromise. How do we restore that?
Yeah, I was hoping you'd be able to tell me that. So I think there are a number of things to be said. All of them I don't think necessarily suggest that you can stuff the genie back in the bottle, because I'm not sure that you can. Some of it's, I think, leadership. By and large, they haven't shown. On both parties, but I think sort of the centrists or the sort of mainstream Republicans have not shown it to their long-term detriment. They will rue the day that they made these mistakes. But I think there's still opportunity for leadership about that. We can listen, that people have grievances and they're not necessarily evil and should be listened to. I think we have to invest in institutions that bring people together. The Army was a great military. I didn't serve in the military, so I'm reluctant to sort of say we should have the draft again or something like that. But it was a great institution of bringing different people, whites and blacks, together in ways that didn't exist before. I think we need to invest in institutions that bring people together in public service and civil service, not exactly for what they do, but just to bring people together from different parts and different walks of life. Because I don't think once you get to know people, you're going to see them in the same demagogic way that you would otherwise.
Oh, no question about that. You went into the other zones and you were respectful. And you didn't go sneeringly. You went like, let's see what happens here. And some of what you have to report is quite positive. And you found really good people whose politics you might find bewildering and so on. That's a remedy, right? We should all go talk to our neighbor of the other persuasion and have a block party. And here in North Dakota, we would have to have cookies shaped like buffalo or pronghorn antelopes or ICBM missiles. I don't know. But there's that, right? That if we all made an effort to find a way to spend time with people whose views we want to dismiss as deplorable on both sides, that we would learn that it's not as bad as it looks and that these are really, most of them, good and decent people who just happen to hold very different views of America.
Yeah, but right. People aren't going to, there are only so many book contracts to go around, right? That's not scalable. But certain things are, the Civilian Conservation Corps, the years of public service. I think those things are what we should be looking at that you can do on a large scale that brings people together from different parts of life without ever saying even if that's not what you're saying the purpose is. But that you have programs that provide opportunities for people to meet and participate together in the civic life of this country. Those things are really missing. And, your question is, do I see that happening anytime particularly soon? Regretfully, no, but I don't think it's impossible.
I'm talking with Ken Stern, the author of several books with Charity for All, and more recently, Republican Like Me, How I Left the Liberal Bubble and Learned to Love the Right. So do you think that the people in power know better? The other night I watched some C-SPAN. I was stuck somewhere, and I watched some C-SPAN. And they're like hearings on the Farm Bill or the interstate highway system or tariffs and so on. And what I came away with was how serious these Congress people are. They're asking good questions. Maybe those questions are prepared by staff, but they're asking good questions. They care about the future of the U.S. forest system. They care about the future of the national park system. If you watch C-SPAN, if you don't die of boredom, you come away thinking there are a lot of serious people trying to do a lot of serious things in Washington, D.C., and many of them are people that had to face the electorate. But then they get in front of the camera and suddenly they're Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yeah. Well, so I think Marjorie Taylor Greene is Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's
no matter what, right?
Yeah. But yeah, I think they probably mostly think they're in a kabuki play of some type, where they have to play a role that they don't like. Or for them as a means to an end, like Marco Rubio is all of a sudden someone who's very unlike the Marco Rubio in the past, because I think he cares about he principally cares about his political future. But if you sort of peeled that away and sort of spoke to him in the cone of silence, he knows that doesn't make sense. The things he's saying doesn't make sense. And I think that's true for a lot of them. But they're characters in a play.
They're characters in a play, and I think many of them know that they're doing something that is somewhat irresponsible or very irresponsible in terms of the Commonwealth, the future of the Republic. I'm not so sure about the people that listen to their every word. In other words, I get it that Marco Rubio, behind closed doors, is probably saying, of course Trump was guilty. Of course he's a schnook. But publicly he's saying, this should never have happened. This is a travesty of justice. There will be payback. It's one thing to say, but then if millions of people rally around that thought, now it's dangerous.
Well, it's the height of irresponsibility. But I think, I look at, and it's painted with the big brush, but, a lot of the sort of the best American political scientists, reframe political office holders. Their principal goal is to get reelected, right? And you could say there are exceptions and people you admire and they don't do those things. But fundamentally, that's their job, is to get reelected. And they do what it takes to get reelected, whether they agree with it or like it or not. And I think that's what you see mostly from the Marco Rubios of the world.
Ask Ted Cruz.
Yeah, right. I mean, slap your forehead. I mean, the craziness, the things that come out of his mouth that were directly opposite of what he said, 4 years ago.
Well, plus Trump said his wife was ugly and that his father was part of the assassination.
Right. I mean,
how do you make up?
Well, if you make up, if your job is to get reelected, you don't care about anything else.
It's so strange. We're all weary of Trump. Even the people who love Trump are weary of Trump. But if he faded away tomorrow and went to live in Sri Lanka, does the country then sigh some relief and move back towards a less crazy politics?
I don't know. I mean, so I 100% agree with you, Clay, that Trump is a symptom, not the cause. But he's an accelerant, has been an accelerant in ways that shock me to this day. There will be others, clearly others who will want to claim the mantle. So no, I don't think he goes away and we go, whew, that chapter is over.
But ask Ron DeSantis how well it works trying to out-Trump Trump. I mean, there's only one Trump. I mean, none of the pretenders gets close.
Right, but there will be people who try to pretend. I think that does not get better until people think that this country is better. I mean, he's effective because the people who are his acolytes feel like they have no stake in the game, that the game is, the rules are stacked against them. And that's why, to your point, it's okay to sort of crack the egg open, because the egg's not mixing some terrible metaphors, but the egg's not my egg. Until people feel like they're being heard and taken seriously and feel like there's a future for them in the current system, them and their kids. The saddest conversations I had in my year was with people who worried about their kids and the opportunities their kids would have, and their certainty that, even if they didn't love their own life, they didn't think their kid would have the same opportunities that they would. I think one of the great failings, sort of missed opportunities, was sort of this notion, of the 99 percenters, the retake Wall Street. There was alignment of people who didn't think of themselves as the 1 percenters, which is 99.9% of the people. That is gone. Until that people come together and say, we're going to change the system for more people, for the better, and we have a stake in it, there'll be opportunities for opportunists.
Enormous pace of change. Now AI is going to, of course, rock everything for a long time here. The digitization of the world and the rise of the internet and social media, we get it. We've heard this 1,000 times. But there's also the series of sort of, I suppose you'd say, cataclysms. There's 9/11. Then you have going to Iraq either on false premises or on mistaken premises, and how did that turn out? We made it worse. W said we're going to spread democracy, and they all want to be like us. Apparently not so. Afghanistan, the debacle of leaving, it was Saigon 2.0. Then comes the pandemic. There's the 2008 collapse of the economy. People go to Congress saying on day one, I'm going to balance the budget, and the national debt just increases and so on. So there's reason to be jaded and cynical, isn't there?
Yeah. And you just depressed the hell out of me with
and then someone comes along and says, I can fix it.
If you stack it that way, but you could also say, a lot more people get to go to college now than they used to. A lot more income inequality, but a lot more income for a lot of people than in the past. I mean, there are a lot of things that are happening that could be good. The question is, they're going to be good for more people. And, it's not impossible, right? I mean, it's just not impossible in this day and age that we can change the system so that more people have a stake and see the possibilities, the notion of the next generation. Until people think that the next generation will better themselves, I don't think there's going to be progress. But when they feel like they have a stake in what happens, then that opens up possibilities.
I don't want to sound like Donald Rumsfeld, but there are things we can control, and then there are things that we can't control. And a lot of the things that are happening in the world of globalization and AI and so on are not beyond politics, but politics is not the best lever to get at them, maybe. And so a lot of people's angst is systemic or based on macroeconomics that are really hard to even fathom, much less adjust, right?
Yeah, but I think it's even narrower than that. I don't know that a lot of people are sitting there sweating AI at this point.
I'm using it.
They're sweating that, the steel factory in Youngstown have all closed down. The coal mills in Pikesville have all closed down.
My pension disappeared,
Yeah. I mean, that's what they're sweating. And it's a terrible tragedy, right? I mean, they all may happen for good economic reasons, and there are a lot of competing interests. But until we say we really care about those people and their future, they're not going to see the reason to care about the system.
What happens on November 5th?
You mean who wins?
Yeah.
Well, I can pick one of two names, and you might as well coin flip. The election will be won by the decisions of low information voters who aren't paying much attention yet, but I think they have memories.
And it doesn't sound like a Jeffersonian democracy the way you put it there. Are you going to write another book?
I am writing another book.
What's it about?
It's about as far away as from this topic. It's about healthy aging. So I've just been but there's actually connective tissue. I mean, you sort of laugh, I think rightly so. It's about the importance of community and social connection in how we live and how we age. I think that's actually true for individuals and societies as well. And some of the things that I'm writing about are the same things that ruined our politics. They're challenging our health as well. Sort of the same pulling apart and bowling alone that has hurt our politics is actually bad for our health as well.
Yeah, I've been traveling the country, and not only people bowl alone, but they golf alone. If there were a way to play pickleball without the opponents, they would find a way to do it. The atomization of America is really an extraordinary phenomenon. And I think part of it is that everyone with any means has a home theater now. And so it's so easy just to sit there with 500 channels and all the films that have ever been made and the best documentaries and you name it. If you want to watch NASCAR 24 hours a day, you can. If you want to watch every Charlie Chaplin movie, you can. And so the idea of leaving the house to go participate in something, even a block party where the cookies are the best, is kind of a rough invitation now.
Yeah. One of the most famous studies of public health in this country is called the Rosetto effect. A little town in Pennsylvania where everyone outlived what they should because they had tight-knit social fabric. Everyone's in and out of their houses. And then they stopped. They sat in their houses and watched TV, and they all died. It was basically
they were going to anyway, but it was accelerated, right?
Yeah. Well, they came back into the study, and sort of all this wonderful public health life expectancy beyond what it should be was all gone.
I have really, truly enjoyed this conversation. You're lots of fun. I hope we get to meet one of these days. It's just, I love good conversation. You're a master at it. Of course, you know wherever you speak. You were the CEO of one of America's greatest institutions, Ken Stern, Haverford, Yale Law. We'll see you all next week for another important edition of Listening to America.